Welcome to Lesson 10. Now we've moved a little way into our Maths Lite program and established our overview, I want to devote some attention to you, the learner. Here is a relevant piece of information about learning. When you learn something, the brain seems to clear it out. If it thinks the information is no longer required, not having used the information for a while seems to trigger the process. Therefore, you have to make a conscious decision to revisit something you managed to learn or risk having to relearn it. The good thing about this is the brain relearns more quickly each time you return to old material. What does this mean for you? Firstly, you should revise regularly, make time every 2 weeks. Secondly, you should establish a mechanism to facilitate this review time. Today I want to look at how you can organise your new knowledge so it's easy to review. Going back to textbooks is not the best way to revise efficiently. They are used for meeting something new. You already have most of that knowledge. You just have to re-establish a connection with it. The best approach is to have a summary in your own words, ready for use when you want to revise. You need to have it structured in a way that matches your understanding, in a form that triggers recognition, and in a format that promotes efficient progress. Textbooks don't usually do any of these. Develop your own summary. It has to be brief for quick use so it isn't a distraction. It has to be clear, simply expressed, easy to understand. It has to be uncluttered. Everything important must be obvious. It's a good idea to use empty space to emphasize associations, colour to distinguish between components, annotations to clarify details. Then you have all the essentials readily on hand. Here's a simple illustration of how this can be done. Assume you have been studying fractions. In your notebook, or wherever you're recording information, you would have a small entry like the one below. Say what the area of study is. Give an example of what a fraction is. Annotate that example. The numerator is the focus of your interest. The denominator represents how much is possible in the circumstances. The line between the numerator and the denominator represents division. A fraction is a way of mathematically comparing sizes. So there in that small entry into your record of what you have been learning, you have a good summary to refer back to later. Include a few examples of usage to reinforce the structure. For example, you could say 25 of the 100 sheep in a flock are black. What proportion is that? Well, 25 compared to the 100, which can be simplified to 1 over 4, or we can say 1 in 4 in common usage. This example builds on the note we saw on the previous page, and it's broadening the terminology as well. Your summary doesn't have to be big and complicated to hold a lot of valuable information. If you make mistakes in class or on tests, treat them as a learning opportunity. Put a brief comment about your error and what the correct response should have been in your summary. Have a separate section for this. An example, if on a test you made a mistake working with fractions, you would put a note somewhere in your reference material. When dividing by a fraction, turn it upside down. There's the statement of what you should have done. Now include an example. A half divided by a quarter is the same as a half multiplied by 4, giving a result of 2. There are 2 quarters in a half. Now that's summary of what you got wrong on a test now becomes a valuable resource. Here are a few different ways of generating a good summary, but remember it must be treated as a separate resource, which is capable of being extended as you learn more about the topic. Add to it regularly, but don't overdo it. Brevity is important. Because of the way school maths programs are structured, you will often revisit topics in later years. So you must leave room in your summary for some future growth. If you're expecting something to return, it's less stressful when you encounter it again. A good way of accommodating all those requirements is to get a new exercise book. Those which use a spring or spiral binding are the easiest to use and they last longer. It's helpful if you include some tabs across the top or down the side or both. Here is an example of a book which was used. It's actually the one from the photograph. This has remained quite viable for 20 years. This is where your eye hits the page first. So that's where you would put important details. Leave this side blank. It allows you to add comments later. It's a good idea to also leave the next page blank, in case you revisit and extend the topic the next year. That saves you starting a new summary then. See how your mindset is directed towards looking ahead. Some students prefer to use something smaller than an exercise book. The exercise book is best left at home and built up when you are there. Smaller options allow more mobility. For example, this small one often fits in your school things and you can work on it while you're at school. Either way, use what you are comfortable with. Now, I've given you some ideas there to help you get organised. We'll have some more later in the program. See you in the next lesson.